Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of August of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kiev, because right before we start making the video there was a very heavy explosion in the territory of the capital of Ukraine. Currently we don't know for sure what exactly did happen there. Maybe that was a Kinzhal strike and no missile alarm or something like this, or that was another warehouse, a house of armored forces of Ukraine that destroyed accidentally. I believe that during the night we're going to receive additional updates, and maybe the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will provide us additional information. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about Urozhaina, about the city, about the area between Urozhaina, Staromayorsk and Velika Novoselovka. The Russians resumed their attempts to attack this territory. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published significant number of videos of how they began bombing this territory with FAP. And this is very important because there was a very long operational pause when talking about the use of FAP 500 and bigger calibers, but now the Russians resumed their things. Furthermore, we got additional video from the road TO518. In this video we can see the work of Russian FPV drones along the road, of how the Russians were hunting and attacking the Ukrainians. From the first sight, this is just a regular video that we've seen before lots of, but if we increase the numbers of updates for 2 days, we're gonna see that yesterday we got the video of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians along these three lines. This is basically the next defense belt of armored forces of Ukraine on the road between Urozhaina and Velika Novoselovka. So, summarizing everything, the Russians were bombing this defense belt of armored forces of Ukraine yesterday, and today they continue their operation by clearing the territory with FPV drones. All these things, all these events that took place for the previous 2 days give us understanding that most likely the Russians are about to begin moving further in the northern direction, and this defense belt, this tree line, is going to be the first target of the Russians. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Ugledar, about Kostiantynivka, Novomikhailivka, Paraskovyevka. We have already discussed the most important updates during the previous video. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to cut the main supply road TO524 between Ugledar, Vadyan and Kostiantynivka. The Russians raised the Russian flag above destroyed vehicle, most likely of armored forces of Ukraine. A few important things that you need to understand. The first thing, and the most important, that this flag was established not by the regular Russian army. Of course, there is only Russian regular army. I'm trying to tell you that the flag was established by sabotage and reconnaissance group. So it doesn't mean that the Russians don't control the road. The road is under complete Russian control, but the Russians still can't send here tanks and armored vehicles due to complete absence of defense or strongholds or fortifications that they can use to hide equipment. Only sabotage and reconnaissance group are able to operate in this direction, but it doesn't mean that it's like nothing dangerous. Of course it's very dangerous, because as I understand, due to the fact that the Russian drone was flying above this territory, due to the fact that the Russian flag was established exactly in this point, most likely the, let's say, edge and the most let's say powerful, experienced Russian sabotage group managed to move even further in the northwestern direction. And as I understand, according just to experience and the previous experience of the special military operation, most likely the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group control everything, let's say to the right and to the bottom of this red line. So everything in this area is already under complete Russian control. The Russians don't give the Ukrainians even a chance to return control over this territory as a result of let's say very fast lightning attacks and work of these sabotage groups. The most important thing that the Russians are trying to do is to get, of course, this red line, and this red line will allow the Russians to establish visual control over the main supply road between the village of Katerinovka and Kostiantynivka itself. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that Katerinovka is becoming new Kostiantynivka, and Kostiantynivka has already become the old Novomikhailivka. So the city, the village is already reduced to ruins, maybe not so deep as was Novomikhailivka reduced, but anyway, the same story is going to take place in this direction as well. Furthermore, the Russian sources published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the southern part of Kostiantynivka. As a result of another fab, the Russians destroyed warehouse or ammo depot, and as a result of a strike we see secondary detonation and very big explosion, which confirms that there was a very big ammo depot most likely. Anyway, the Russians by this attack were trying to clear the southern part, probably with the purpose to attack in this direction as well. Anyway, summarizing everything once again, we can start counting days when Kostiantynivka falls, and obviously this is going to happen during August. The Ukrainians basically will be forced to fall back from this direction. Now let's move further, and now let's talk about Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours we got a lot of updates from this territory. We have some changes on the ground that were confirmed, some of them weren't confirmed, so let's discuss step by step. And let's start from the northern direction. According to information we have, the Russians are moving further in the western direction from Timofeevka, and the Russians reached the outskirts and the first, let's say, trenches and the fortifications of the next stronghold that lays between Lysychina and Timofeevka itself. This stronghold is still under complete Ukraine control, and currently there are very heavy clashes exactly for this territory. If the Russians are able to take under control this small stronghold, the Ukrainians most likely will be forced to fall back, not just from Lysychina, but they will be forced to move to Svyridanivka, so the next village in Pokrovsk direction. As for Ivanovka, the Russians managed to reach the outskirts of this village probably a week or something ago, and just today, after a week or maybe more of heavy clashes in this direction, the first Russian groups and the first Russian sabotage and assault troopers entered this village and began clashes for the south and let's say eastern part of this small village. So there are very heavy clashes right now, yet we haven't received any geolocations. The only thing we have is some report from some pro-Russian sources that assault operations are underway, and we have adjusted the map according to pro-Ukrainian mappers. So this is the current situation in this direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about Veselaya. According to information we have, the village was captured completely by the Russians. As you can see, we the same story as for Ivanovka. We still haven't received any geolocations that can confirm Russian control over this territory. We have just mappers, different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian deep state, that reported about significant progress of armed forces of Russian Federation. Now it's very difficult. The deeper the Russians are moving further in the western direction, the more difficult to understand what the Russians are going to do next, because it's like a simple simple answer to simple question that somewhere the Russians should stop, because it seems like impossible to move so fast and so endless in the western direction without any Ukrainian resistance. Sometimes it's all the situation looks like a trap, but because we haven't seen such a progress of Russian army probably since the beginning of the special military operation. The last time when the Russians were so fast, so let's say impossible to stop, probably in 2022 when the Russians just crossed the border with Ukraine. And this is like unbelievable progress of armed forces of Russian Federation. Furthermore, we have additional progress in the village of Zalizne. According to information we have, the Russians captured the railway station and reached the southwestern edge of the village of Zalizne. Basically, the Russians cut the supply between Sergeyevka and Zalizne itself, and from this perspective, when talking about supply roads, we see that the village of Sergeyevka is no longer has any supply from the mainland. The southern road was cut between Zalizne and Sergeyevka. The northern road was cut in the vicinity to the west north of Veselaya. Maybe the Russians are going to move in this village as the next target, maybe not. Maybe they will try to finish with Zalizne itself, because in this direction we have also additional progress of the Russians that was confirmed by geolocation. Very heavy clashes were taking place in the fields between Zalizne itself and the Ukrainian stronghold. First, the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack and to send additional reinforcement. In this video we can see Ukrainian Bradley that was moving along this tree line and attacking Russian positions along tree line. As you can see, the Ukrainian Bradley was under very heavy attack with Russian anti-tank missiles. Then then we can see the Ukrainian soldiers landed in this area, and due to the fact that Bradley was damaged and most likely destroyed, the Ukrainians decided to fall back towards more reliable positions. And later, the Ukrainian sources published the video of work of their FPV drone operators. The Ukrainian operators, FPV drone fighters, were bombing the Russians in the same direction. Based on these two videos, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps and added additional area under complete Russian control. And the most important, as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians introduced 27th Division. So this 27th Division is a very powerful one. This division was, let's say, transferred to 21st Brigade a few years ago, and just this summer of this spring of 2024, the Russians restored this 27th Division. This is newly created division. This division was operating already along the villages of Ocheretina, Solovyova, and now the main forces of this division were introduced, brought to the fight, to the battle. This division has, as I remember, as I know, four mechanized regiments and lots of reconnaissance battalions, artillery battalion. So this is very powerful and very big, fresh division that was brought by the Russians to the battle. And according to different sources, the Russians are planning to break through the Ukrainian defense belt completely to defeat the Ukrainians, and maybe with additional forces to increase the pressure and to get to artillery distance to the city of Pokrov, so to have possibilities to begin bombing and attacking the Ukrainians inside of the city with FPV drones, with artillery systems, and so on. Now let's move further. We have additional and very interesting updates from Toretsk, New York agglomeration. First, let's talk about New York. According to information we have, as a result of very heavy clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the eastern part of New York, and the Russians captured additional streets, buildings, and fortifications of armed forces of Ukraine. They reached the 8 March Street, 8 Berezhny Street, and the Russians managed to reduce the distance between the southern Russian positions and the northern Russian positions inside of Pivdinne. During the previous video, we were already talking about this territory, about this, let's say, progress of the Russians, but this area, the southwestern part of Pivdinne, was colored as contested area because we got report just from reliable mapper without any confirmation with geolocation. And right before we start making the video, the Ukrainian forces of 100 and mechanized brigade published the video, another batch of videos of FPV drone strikes, FPV drone attacks on Russian positions all over the entire southwestern part of Pivdinne. Some of the geolocations were geolocated, and one of Ukrainian FPV drone attack took place exactly in this building. And based on this video, as I understand, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps. And now we have 100% confirmation that Zalizne and Pivdinne, this is Zalizne, sorry, yes, that Zalizne and Pivdinne have fallen. The Russians reached the southwestern outskirts of this city, and currently the distance between edge Russian positions in Zalizne and edge Russian positions inside of New York is less than 3.3 kilometers, and this is already nothing for a cauldron. Furthermore, if we take a look at this map, at exactly at this area, we won't see any buildings, fortifications, constructions, trenches, anything. We will not see anything, just water barriers, rivers, and fields, nothing more. It's highly unlikely that Ukrainians, due to this situation, are able to break through the fields and to abandon their positions from the rich network of the fortifications that located between New York, Zalizne, Pivdinne, and Gorlovka itself. I don't think that Ukrainians are able to withdraw their positions without losses. The losses are going to be, and most likely, the losses are going to be very heavy. The Ukrainians will lose hundreds of soldiers if they decide to fall back. But anyway, they don't have any other option. Most likely the Ukrainians from the mainland will not conduct any counterattacks, only deblocking or unblocking operation, because it will be like suicide operation. The Ukrainians will lose and unblocking forces and those who are in a cauldron. So we'll see what is going to be next. I believe that these soldiers will surrender. it's the smartest solution decision they can let's say make. And now let's talk about Chasiv Yar. There are very heavy clashes, but without any changes on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published additional videos of how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces inside of the Chasiv Yar citadel. So the Russians began clearing this territory and began preparing this territory for a ground assault operation. Now let's move to Siversk. We have additional updates. There are very heavy clashes along the railways from Razdolovka to Zvanovka through Perezhne. The Russian sources published additional video of how they were bombing the main stronghold of armored forces of Ukraine along the railways in the vicinity of Zvanovka and Perezhne. As you can see, as a result of another FAB attack, the Ukrainians suffered significant losses. The Russians destroyed most likely some warehouses, ammo depots, or temporary positions of armored forces of Ukraine. And all this is the second day in a row when we are receiving additional updates and significant number of updates exactly from this direction. Most likely there are very heavy clashes right now. The Russians are storming these positions. The Ukrainians are trying to repel the Russian attack, yet we haven't received any update, any confirmation from anybody about progress or success. But summarizing everything, according to reports we got yesterday and according to videos we received today, most likely the Russians are attacking something like this. They're using like a hook attack, like a hook, and they're trying to move from Razdolovka to the north, and then they're turning to the west, trying to answer the Ukrainian positions along the railways. The Russians are moving using the broad front line attack. The only thing I don't understand what the Russians are doing with the minefields that obviously are located in this area. Furthermore, we got additional updates about some kind of intensifying of actions of armored forces of Russian Federation in Verkhnyokamyanskaya direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians resumed their artillery strikes, artillery attacks in this area, trying to destroy Ukrainian FPV drone positions, Ukrainian artillery navigators, and many other important, structures and configuration military facilities in this small village. Most likely, due to the Russian attempts to attack Kostiumuk, Perezhne, Zvanovka in the south, most likely the Russians will try to attack Verkhnyokamyanska from the line of Sporne, from Ivanodarivka. It's most likely attack, the most likely the road the Russians are planning to use. Now let's talk about Kupiansk area. We haven't received additional lots of updates. In Yampol area, the Russians attacked the temporary position of armored forces of Ukraine. And you know that today I asked myself very interesting question. Basically we can say that the special military operation started with Gostomel operation, but as for the big battle, the big assault operation, or one of the biggest battle of 2022 was the battle for Mariupol, right? So basically the special military operation started with that battle, the battle for Mariupol. And the core defense brigade in the battle for Mariupol was the 12th Special Purpose Brigade Azov. So they were responsible, they were located in that cauldron, and they were repelling the Russian attacks. And the thing is that I ask myself if the Russians are able to get Slavyansk and Kramatorsk ever. So I ask myself which brigade the Ukrainians will use for, responsibility for these two cities and for this agglomeration. And according to geolocations and according to just the configuration of the front line, I believe that if the Russians are able ever to get the outskirts of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and if there are going to be ever assault operation in this direction, most likely these two cities and the heart of Donbas Arc operation will be under the responsibilities of this 12th Special Purpose Brigade Azov. I think that special military operation started with them, with the clashes with them, and obviously the special military operation will be ended also with the battle with them. Now let's move further and let's talk about northern Kupiansk direction. We haven't received a lot of updates, just regular activity. The Russians during the previous weeks managed to improve their positions significantly. The Russians captured the villages in the vicinity of Berestovo, Pishane, Velistipovo, Novoselka, so they managed to improve their positions a lot. And during the previous few days, the Russians were just bombing and attacking the Ukrainians all over the entire Kupiansk front line, trying to reduce their logistic, destroying the bridge bridges, destroying the main supply roads more and more, but without any changes on the ground. But obviously, we need to expect that sooner or later the Russians will resume their attempts, and they will try to improve their positions further in Kupiansk and Oskol River direction. As for northern Kharkiv area, we haven't received anything important. The only important thing that I already discussed with you, that the Russians currently are no longer attacking the Ukrainian forces. Starting of the 2nd of August, according to the official statement of the Group of Forces North, the Russians are no longer attacking and storming Ukrainian positions. The Russians are in complete and total and strategical defense. And because the most important, according to the Russians, the Ukrainians concentrated the most powerful and the most combat capability group of forces, and the Russians still believe that the Ukrainians do have political will to begin counteroffensive exactly in this direction, with the purpose to do a lot of mass. Obviously, they are not able to do anything else but just a lot of mass. So we'll see, of course, what is going to be next. Also, would like to share with you the video that was published by the Russians in the vicinity of Krasne. The video was made by the Russian soldier who was moving from Krasne to Gluboka. In this video, we can see a small field of destroyed Russian vehicles, tanks, personnel carriers that most likely were destroyed during the first phases in May, in June and July during the battle for this stronghold. As you can see, lots of vehicles were destroyed by Ukrainian FPV drones, maybe by artillery. Maybe some of these tanks belonged to Ukrainians, but we see another cemetery of armored vehicles somewhere in Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.